The waitress emptied the wine glass onto the floor. The Mafia Boss saw the carpet smoking. Why did the waitress empty the wine glass onto the floor? What made the Mafia Boss notice the carpet smoking? Welcome back to our channel, everyone. We are grateful to have you here today. Please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our upcoming stories. Thank you for joining us and supporting the channel with your continued presence. Let us know in the comments where in the world you are watching from and what time it is where you are right now. We appreciate every moment you spend with us as we share this unforgettable journey across the world today. Now, let's begin today's story. Don't touch that bottle. Those were the last words anyone expected to hear from a waitress standing in the middle of Manhattan's most exclusive charity gala. I still remember the sound of the room before everything changed. The soft music from the orchestra, the quiet conversations between people who wore watches worth more than my yearly salary, the gentle clinking of crystal glasses under the glow of golden chandeliers. And then, my own voice breaking through it all. Put the glass down. My name is Laurel Whitmore, and at that moment, I was just a waitress trying to finish my shift and go home. I wasn't powerful. I wasn't wealthy. I wasn't someone important enough for people in that room to remember. I was 26 years old, working late nights at an upscale restaurant in Manhattan while saving every dollar I could. But that evening, one small decision placed me directly in front of the most feared man in the city, Vincent Callahan. The kind of man whose name made conversation stop. The kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice because everyone already listened. I had served hundreds of wealthy guests before him, but I had never felt an atmosphere change the moment someone entered a room. It wasn't because he demanded attention. It was because everyone gave it to him. He stood near the center of the ballroom in a perfectly tailored black suit, surrounded by people who wanted his approval and others who were careful not to disappoint him. His expression remained calm, almost unreadable, as if nothing in the world could surprise him. Then the vintage wine arrived. A rare bottle displayed like a treasure. $10,000 of history inside a glass container. The guests around the table smiled, waiting for the celebration to begin. I carried another tray across the room, keeping my eyes down like I always did. Waitresses learn quickly. You notice everything, but you become invisible. You remember which guest prefers sparkling water, which person dislikes interruptions, which conversations you should never hear. But sometimes, the smallest detail refuses to be ignored. My eyes moved toward the bottle, then toward the glass on the table. Something felt wrong. I couldn't explain it at first. It was only a feeling, a tiny warning in the back of my mind. The kind of instinct people usually dismiss because they don't have a reason to trust it. I looked around the room. Everyone was focused on Vincent Callahan. Everyone was waiting for the toast. Everyone believed the night was perfectly controlled. But I couldn't look away from that glass. My hands tightened around the tray I was holding. For a moment, I questioned myself. Who was I to interrupt a room full of powerful people? Who was I to stop a celebration involving someone like Vincent Callahan? I was just Laurel Whitmore, a waitress, a woman most people would walk past without noticing. But sometimes, being unnoticed gives you the chance to see what everyone else misses. I placed the tray down. I took one step forward, then another. The conversations around me slowly faded as people noticed movement. Vincent's eyes turned toward me, cold, curious, watching. And in that moment, I knew every person in that ballroom was waiting to see what I would do next. I knew the moment I stepped forward that I was no longer invisible. The room had changed. A few seconds earlier, I was just another employee carrying trays between tables. Now, every conversation had slowed, every pair of eyes had turned, and the man everyone feared was watching me carefully. Vincent Callahan did not move. He simply looked at me with the calm expression of someone who was used to controlling every situation. "Miss, is there a problem?" His voice was quiet, but it carried across the space between us. I swallowed and looked at the glass sitting on the table. My heart was beating faster than I wanted anyone to notice. "I need you to wait before drinking that." A few guests exchanged confused looks. Someone near the table gave a small laugh, as if a waitress interrupting a private celebration was the most ridiculous thing they had seen all night. I understood why they reacted that way. In their eyes, I was crossing a line. But I had learned something during the years I spent working around people with money and influence. The people who were ignored often noticed the things everyone else overlooked. Vincent's eyes narrowed slightly, not with anger, with curiosity. "And why should I listen to you?" he asked. It was a fair question. I had no title, no authority, no reason that should have mattered to someone like him. I looked around the ballroom, the marble floors, the expensive decorations, the guests dressed in designer clothing, a world that always seemed like it belonged to someone else. Then I looked back at him, because I would rather embarrass myself for being wrong than stay quiet if I am right. For the first time that evening, something changed in Vincent's expression. It was small, almost impossible to notice. But I saw it. He was listening. I reached for the bottle before anyone could stop me. The room went completely silent. The kind of silence that feels heavier than noise. A woman at the table stood up quickly. "What are you doing?" she asked. I did not answer. I could feel every person watching me. I could feel the judgment, the confusion, the disbelief. But I kept moving. I lifted the bottle and poured a small amount onto the expensive rug beneath the table. At first, nothing happened. A few people looked relieved. Someone whispered that I had made a mistake. Then the fibers changed. A faint sound rose from the carpet. A strange reaction. A warning that everyone could see. The color beneath the glass began to fade, and the elegant surface that had covered the ballroom floor moments before started breaking down. The room froze. The same people who had been ready to dismiss me seconds earlier were now staring at the carpet. Vincent looked down. Then he looked at the bottle. Then back at me. His expression was no longer distant. It was focused. "Everyone step back," he said calmly. This time, nobody questioned him. The guests moved away from the table as security quietly approached. But Vincent did not take his eyes off me. He studied me like he was trying to understand a question he had never been asked before. I expected anger. I expected accusations. I expected someone to tell me I had ruined something valuable. Instead, he asked the one thing I did not expect. How did a waitress know? The question stayed in the air. I looked at the damaged rug, then at the man standing in front of me. A man surrounded by power, wealth, and people who followed his every command. And somehow, in that moment, he was the one searching for answers. "Because," I said quietly, "I pay attention." Vincent Callahan continued watching me. And for the first time in a very long time, the man who controlled the room had found someone he could not predict. I thought saving his life would make Vincent Callahan grateful. I was wrong. It made him curious. And curiosity from a man like him was something far more complicated. The ballroom slowly returned to movement after the guests realized the danger had passed. People began whispering again, but the conversations were different now. They were not talking about the expensive wine or the damaged carpet. They were talking about me, the waitress who had interrupted the most important person in the room. I stood there holding my breath, waiting for the consequences. I had seen enough wealthy customers become furious over a spilled drink or a delayed order. I knew how quickly kindness could disappear when someone believed money gave them the right to everything. But Vincent Callahan did not raise his voice. He did not demand an explanation in front of everyone. He simply looked at the bottle, then at the damaged area on the carpet, and finally at me. "Your name," he said. It was not a question. It sounded like he expected an answer. "Laurel Whitmore." He repeated it quietly, almost as if he was memorizing it. "How long have you worked here?" "Almost 2 years. And before that?" I hesitated. That was not a question most people asked me. They usually wanted to know my availability, my schedule, or whether I could carry another tray. They did not ask about the person behind the uniform. "Different jobs," I answered. "I have done a little of everything." Vincent studied me for a moment. The way he looked at people was different from anyone I had ever met. Most people looked at a waitress and saw someone who was there to serve them. Vincent looked like he was searching for something hidden. You recognized something unusual about the wine before anyone else did. I looked down at my hands. I noticed a reaction. From what? The glass. The smell. The way the liquid moved. A few guests nearby were still listening. I could feel their attention, but I ignored it. Sometimes small details tell you everything. Vincent remained silent. Then one of his security members stepped closer and quietly spoke to him. I could not hear every word, but I noticed the change in Vincent's expression. The calm confidence remained, but something heavier appeared underneath. Concern, not fear. Something else. A realization that this was more serious than anyone expected. Clear this area, Vincent instructed. The staff immediately followed his order. It was strange watching people move so quickly because of one man's voice. I had worked around powerful people before, but I had never seen this level of influence. He did not need to demand attention. Attention belonged to him already. I should have walked away. My shift was nearly over. I had done what I needed to do. But as I turned toward the service area, Vincent spoke again. Laurel. I stopped. Nobody had ever said my name like that before. Not with suspicion. Not with judgment. Like it actually mattered. Where did you learn to recognize something like this? For a moment, I considered giving him a simple answer. I considered saying I was just observant and leaving it there. But something about the way he asked made me pause. I used to work in quality testing, I said. His eyes changed slightly. Quality testing. Food and beverage analysis. I looked away. It was a long time ago. Why leave? The question caught me off guard. I was not used to explaining my choices to strangers, especially strangers who could probably find out anything they wanted about anyone. Because life changes, I said. Sometimes you stop doing what you planned and start doing what you have to do. Vincent looked at me for several seconds. Then he glanced toward the ruined carpet again. You understand that most people would have ignored what they saw tonight. Maybe. Why did you not? I thought about it. The answer was simple. Because someone would have paid the price if I stayed quiet. The room became quiet again. Not because people were afraid. Because those words seemed to reach somewhere deeper. Vincent Callahan had spent years surrounded by people who wanted something from him. Money, connections, approval. But standing there in a crowded ballroom, he was looking at someone who wanted nothing from him at all. And that seemed to interest him more than anything else that happened that night. I had spent years learning how to disappear in plain sight. At restaurants like that, being unnoticed was a skill. You moved quietly. You listened carefully. You never interrupted conversations that were not yours. You smiled when people needed something and stepped away when they no longer saw you. That was how I survived. But that night, after Vincent Callahan asked me questions that nobody had ever bothered to ask, I realized disappearing was no longer an option. The ballroom slowly emptied as the staff began restoring order. The guests returned to their conversations, but the atmosphere had changed. People were still looking at me, not because I was a waitress anymore, because they wanted to understand why Vincent Callahan was interested in what I had to say. I returned to the service area and tried to focus on my work. There were glasses to collect, tables to clear, a dozen small tasks that usually helped me forget everything else. But my hands felt different. They felt heavier, like I had stepped into a world I was never supposed to enter. My coworker Rachel noticed immediately. Laurel, are you okay? She whispered while arranging clean plates. I nodded. I think so. Do you know who that man is? She asked, glancing toward the other side of the room. I did not need to look. I already knew exactly who she meant. Vincent Callahan. She lowered her voice. Everyone knows that name. I had heard it before. Not from personal experience. From rumors. From quiet conversations between customers who thought employees were not listening. A businessman. A powerful figure. A man surrounded by mystery. People always had different stories about him, but they all agreed on one thing. Vincent Callahan was someone you did not underestimate. I looked across the ballroom. He was standing near the windows, speaking with his security team. The city lights reflected against the glass behind him, creating a scene that felt almost unreal. A man surrounded by everything most people spent their entire lives chasing. Wealth, influence, respect. Yet somehow, he looked completely alone. I looked away quickly. That was not my concern. I had bills to pay. A small apartment in Queens. A schedule that changed every week. A future I was still trying to build. Men like Vincent Callahan belonged to another universe. After my shift ended, I changed out of my uniform and stepped outside into the cool Manhattan night. The streets were still busy. Cars passed. People walked beneath the city lights. Everything continued as normal, but my life no longer felt exactly the same. My phone buzzed before I reached the subway entrance. I expected a message from Rachel or a reminder about tomorrow's schedule. Instead, it was a number I did not recognize. I stared at the screen for a moment before answering. "Hello," a calm voice responded. "Miss Whitmore." I stopped walking. I knew that voice. "Who is this?" There was a brief pause. "Vincent Callahan." The noise of the street seemed to fade for a second. "How did you get my number?" I asked. The question came out more sharply than I intended. "My assistant contacted the restaurant." Of course he did. Someone like him probably had access to information within minutes. "Is there a problem?" I asked. "No," he replied. "Actually, I wanted to thank you. I was not expecting that." "You do not have to thank me. I was just doing what anyone should have done. That is exactly why I am calling." His voice became quieter, because most people would not have done it. I looked down at the sidewalk beneath my feet. For years, I had felt like my choices did not matter. Like my voice disappeared among people who had more money, more power, and more influence. But tonight, a man who seemed to own every room he entered had noticed one small decision I made. "Good night, Mr. Callahan," I said. Before he could respond, I ended the call. I expected that to be the end of it. A strange moment during a strange evening. Something I would remember years later, but never experience again. I was wrong. Because the next morning, when I arrived at the restaurant, my manager was waiting for me with a serious expression. "Laurel, someone came by earlier asking about you." I felt my stomach tighten. "Who?" He hesitated. "Someone from Vincent Callahan's office." And suddenly, I understood something. Saving a stranger's night was one thing. But when that stranger was Vincent Callahan, nothing stayed simple. I learned something important that morning. When someone powerful notices you, your life does not suddenly become easier. Sometimes, it becomes more complicated. I arrived at the restaurant earlier than usual, hoping that the strange events from the previous night would slowly become just another memory. But the moment I stepped through the employee entrance, I knew that was not going to happen. My manager, Daniel, was standing near the office door with a folder in his hand. His expression was serious, the kind of expression that made every employee wonder if they had made a mistake. "Laurel," he said, "someone came looking for you." I placed my bag down slowly. "Who?" He looked toward the dining room before answering. "Someone from Vincent Callahan's office." The name alone changed the atmosphere. Even people who were pretending not to listen suddenly became quiet. I did not like that feeling. I had spent years building a normal life. A predictable life. Work, bills, saving money, planning for the future. I did not want my name connected to rumors about powerful people. "Did they say why?" I asked. Daniel handed me the folder. Inside was a simple letter and a business card. Nothing dramatic. Nothing threatening. Just a request for a private conversation. I stared at the card for a long moment. Vincent Callahan. The same man whose presence could silence an entire ballroom. The same man who had looked at me like I was not invisible. I should have ignored it. That would have been the smart choice. But curiosity has a way of pulling people toward doors they should leave closed. Later that afternoon, I found myself sitting in a quiet corner of a small coffee shop across from one of Vincent's assistants. Her name was Evelyn Harper, and unlike the people I usually associated with Vincent, she seemed calm and professional. "Mr. Callahan wanted to speak with you personally," she explained. "But he understands you may not feel comfortable." I almost laughed. Comfortable was not the word I would use. Why does he want to talk to me? Evelyn opened a folder and placed a document on the table. It was information about the incident at the gala. Not rumors. Not gossip. Facts. Because what happened was not an accident. I looked at the paper. What does that mean? It means Mr. Callahan believes you noticed something that others missed. I remembered the moment again. The glass. The bottle. The feeling that something was wrong. I had trusted my instincts, but I never expected anyone to investigate further. "I did not do anything special," I said. Evelyn looked at me carefully. "That is exactly what makes it unusual." I looked out the window at the people walking past on the street. Everyone was moving through their ordinary lives. Buying coffee, going to work, talking on their phones. Normal moments. Moments I understood. "I do not belong in this world," I said quietly. Evelyn did not disagree. Instead, she answered honestly. "Maybe not. But sometimes the people outside a world are the ones who see it clearly." That sentence stayed with me. Because deep down, I knew she was right. I had spent so much time believing my ordinary life made me insignificant. But the truth was, being ordinary had given me a different perspective. I noticed the things others ignored because I had never been protected by wealth or status. I knew what it felt like to depend on details. Small opportunities. Small warnings. Small choices. When I finally agreed to meet Vincent, I told myself it was only to answer questions. Nothing more. No expectations. No connection. Just a conversation. But when I arrived at his office later that evening, I immediately understood why people described him the way they did. The building was quiet, elegant, controlled. Every person seemed to know exactly what they were doing. Then the elevator doors opened, and there he was. Vincent Callahan stood near the window overlooking the city. The same calm expression, the same unreadable eyes. But this time, something was different. He was not looking at me like a waitress who had interrupted his night. He was looking at me like someone who had changed the direction of his plans. "Laurel Whitmore," he said. I wanted to understand the person who saw what everyone else missed. I stepped into the room, unsure why my heartbeat had changed. Maybe because I realized something. The night at the gala was not the end of a strange moment. It was the beginning of something neither of us expected. I had spent my entire life believing that powerful people created distance for a reason. They lived behind walls that ordinary people could not enter. They had private offices, private meetings, private worlds. And I had always accepted that. Until I found myself standing inside Vincent Callahan's office, looking at a man who had built an entire life around control, yet seemed genuinely interested in understanding me. The office was quiet, not the uncomfortable kind of silence. The kind that made you aware of every small sound. The soft hum of the city outside the windows. The ticking of a clock on the wall. The sound of my own footsteps as I moved toward the chair across from his desk. Vincent remained standing for a moment, looking over documents on his desk. Then he closed the folder and gave me his full attention. "Thank you for coming." I nodded. I almost did not. A small expression crossed his face. Not quite a smile. More like surprise that someone had answered him honestly. Most people would have accepted the invitation immediately. I am not most people. The words came out before I could stop them. But instead of being offended, Vincent seemed to appreciate them. "No," he said quietly. "You are not." He motioned toward the chair, and I sat down. For a moment, neither of us spoke. It was strange. This was a man who was used to people filling silence with explanations and compliments. But I did not know what to say. I was not there to impress him. I was not there because I wanted something from him. I was there because I wanted answers. "Why me?" I asked. Vincent looked at me. "Because you were the only person in that room who acted without expecting anything in return." I looked away. "I just did what I thought was right." "That is rare." His answer was immediate. "Not as rare as you think. You would be surprised." There was something in his voice that made me pause. For the first time, I noticed that behind all the confidence, there was exhaustion. A kind of tiredness that money could not fix. I had seen it before. Not in wealthy people. In ordinary people. People who carried responsibilities quietly and smiled anyway. "You think everyone around you wants something from you," I said. Vincent looked at me carefully. "Why would you say that?" "Because everyone in that ballroom was watching you. Some wanted your approval. Some wanted your attention. Some wanted to be close to your influence." I looked at the city outside. But nobody looked like they actually knew you. The room became quiet again. I wondered if I had gone too far. I was a waitress speaking to one of the most influential men in the city. But Vincent did not interrupt me. Instead, he walked toward the window and looked out at Manhattan. "People see what they want to see," he said. "Sometimes they see power and forget there is a person behind it." That sentence stayed with me, because it was the first time I heard him speak like a human being instead of a symbol. After a few minutes, he returned to his desk and opened another folder. "There is something else you should know." My attention immediately changed. "About the wine?" I asked. He nodded. The situation was more complicated than we first realized. I waited. Someone wanted me distracted that evening. They wanted attention focused in one direction while something else happened somewhere else. I listened carefully, and you noticed the only thing that interrupted their plan. I did not know what to say. The idea that my decision had mattered beyond that one moment was difficult to understand. Why tell me this? I asked. Vincent looked directly at me. Because you are involved now. Those words made me uncomfortable. I do not want to be involved in your world, Vincent. It was the first time I used his first name. I noticed it. So did he. I have a normal life. I have work. I have responsibilities. He nodded slowly. I know. Then why bring me here? For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he answered with a quiet honesty I did not expect. Because I needed to know who saved me. I looked at him. Not because of the words themselves. Because of the way he said them. There was no arrogance. No expectation. Just a simple truth. And somehow, that made it harder to ignore. When I left his office that night, I thought I had gained answers. But as I stepped into the elevator and watched the doors close, I realized something else had changed. Vincent Callahan was no longer just a name I had heard in whispers. He was a person, and that made him far more complicated than I ever imagined. I thought leaving Vincent Callahan's office would put distance between us. I thought I could return to my ordinary routine, put on my uniform, carry my trays, and pretend that one unusual night had never happened. But some moments do not disappear just because you walk away from them. They follow you. They wait. They quietly change the direction of your life before you even realize it. The next few days felt different. Not because my world had suddenly changed on the outside. I still woke up in my small apartment in Queens. I still took the subway every morning. I still counted my expenses carefully and planned my weeks around my work schedule. But something inside me had shifted. I had seen a side of Vincent Callahan that nobody talked about. Not the rumors. Not the reputation. Not the powerful man everyone seemed to fear. I had seen someone who carried the weight of being constantly watched. And somehow, that stayed with me. 3 days after our meeting, I arrived at the restaurant for my evening shift. The dining room was already preparing for another busy night. Glasses were being polished. Tables were being arranged. The familiar sounds of the restaurant surrounded me, and for a moment, everything felt normal again. Then Daniel called my name from across the room. Laurel, there is someone waiting for you. My first thought was that it was another message from Vincent's office. I felt a strange mixture of curiosity and hesitation. But when I turned around, I saw Vincent standing near the entrance. Alone. No large group of people around him. No dramatic entrance. Just Vincent Callahan wearing a simple dark coat, looking completely out of place among the restaurant staff and evening customers. Everyone noticed him anyway. They always did. Some people have a presence that cannot be ignored. Vincent had that kind of presence. What are you doing here? I asked. He looked around the restaurant. I wanted to talk somewhere you felt comfortable. That answer surprised me. A person like Vincent could have asked me to come anywhere. Instead, he came to my world. You could have called. I did not want to interrupt your day. I almost smiled. You are Vincent Callahan. I think interrupting things is probably what people expect you to do. A quiet expression crossed his face. Maybe that is the problem. I studied him for a moment. The old version of me would have assumed that powerful people always acted the same way. But Vincent kept proving that my assumptions were incomplete. We sat at a small table near the back of the restaurant after I finished my immediate tasks. It felt strange. I had served him before as a customer. Now I was sitting across from him as an equal. At least, that was how he treated me. I owe you something, he said. You already thanked me. That was not enough. I shook my head. You do not owe me anything. You still do not understand. His voice became quieter. Most people help because they expect a reward. They want access. They want recognition. You risked being embarrassed in front of everyone because you believed something was wrong. I looked down at the table. I just could not ignore it. Vincent nodded slowly. Exactly. There was something almost unfamiliar in his expression. Respect. Genuine respect. You know, I said, people probably think I am crazy. People are often uncomfortable when someone does what they would not have the courage to do. I looked at him. That was not the answer I expected. You really believe that? I do. The conversation continued longer than I expected. We talked about simple things. My work. The restaurant. The city. The small routines that made up my life. For once, Vincent was not asking questions because he needed information. He was asking because he wanted to know. And that was different. Before he left, he paused near the door. Laurel. I looked up. Thank you for reminding me that not everyone sees the world the way I do. I did not know what to say, so I simply nodded. After he walked away, I watched the door close behind him. I thought about how strange it was. A man who had everything most people dreamed of having had stopped to listen to someone like me. A waitress with no influence, no powerful connections, no reason to matter in his world. But maybe that was exactly why he noticed me. Because in a world where everyone wanted something from him, I was the one person who had only wanted to do the right thing. I used to believe that the most dangerous thing about Vincent Callahan was his reputation. The whispers, the stories, the way people changed their behavior the moment his name was mentioned. But after spending more time around him, I realized something else. The most difficult thing about Vincent was not understanding what other people feared about him. It was understanding what he kept hidden from everyone else. A week passed after he visited the restaurant. I tried to return to my normal routine, but normal felt different now. Every time I walked through the city, I noticed things I had never paid attention to before. The expensive cars outside buildings. The people who lowered their voices during certain conversations. The invisible world that existed beside ordinary life. A world I had accidentally stepped into. Then one evening, I received a call from Vincent. His voice sounded different. Not distant. Not controlled. Just serious. "Laurel, I need your help." Those words surprised me more than anything else. Vincent Callahan was not someone who usually asked for help. "What happened?" I asked. "There is someone I need you to meet." I hesitated. Every reasonable thought told me to be careful. My life had always been simple because I avoided complicated situations. But another part of me remembered the man I had spoken with at the restaurant. The man who listened instead of commanding. "Where?" I asked. Later that evening, I arrived at a quiet private residence outside Manhattan. It was not what I expected. I imagined something cold and intimidating. Instead, it was a beautiful but quiet place surrounded by trees and open space. It felt less like a place of power and more like a place where someone came to escape from it. Vincent was waiting near the entrance. "Thank you for coming." I looked around. "You are welcome. But you still have not explained why I am here." He paused for a moment. "Because I think you will understand something others do not." That answer made me curious. He led me inside, where I met someone I never expected to see. A young man named Adrian, one of Vincent's closest associates. Unlike the confident people I had seen around Vincent before, Adrian seemed uncertain. He was holding a small notebook and looking through old information. Vincent introduced us briefly. Then he explained why he had called me. Adrian has been trying to understand what happened at the gala. He believes there are details we missed. I looked at the notebook. "And you think I can help?" Vincent nodded. "You notice patterns." I almost laughed. "I am a waitress, Vincent." "No," he said calmly. "You are someone who pays attention when everyone else is distracted." That sentence stayed with me. Because maybe he was right. My entire life, I had thought being unnoticed was a disadvantage. But perhaps it had given me a different kind of awareness. We spent the next few hours reviewing small details from that night. Nothing dramatic. Just observations. Timing. Conversations. Simple things that most people would forget. I remembered a guest who arrived late. A conversation that suddenly stopped when someone entered the room. A moment when everyone looked toward Vincent and nobody noticed what was happening elsewhere. As I spoke, Vincent listened carefully. He did not interrupt. He did not dismiss my thoughts because I was not an expert. He treated every detail as if it mattered. That was something I was not used to. Near midnight, I looked at the notes scattered across the table. "I do not understand something," I said. "Why trust me?" Vincent looked at me for a long moment. "Because you had no reason to lie to me." The answer was simple, but it carried more meaning than I expected. People often think trust is built through power, money, or status. But sometimes it begins with one person seeing another person clearly. When I finally left that night, I realized something had changed. I was no longer just the waitress who happened to be in the right place at the right time. Vincent Callahan had started seeing me as someone who belonged in the conversation. And somehow, without realizing it, I had started seeing him as more than just the man everyone else feared. I never expected a simple observation to change the way people looked at me. Before meeting Vincent Callahan, I thought attention was something you earned through success, money, or status. People noticed those who stood above everyone else. They noticed leaders. They noticed powerful names. They noticed people who had built something impossible to ignore. I never imagined they would notice someone like me. But after that night, I started receiving messages from people I had never met. Not personal messages. Not friendly ones. Just small reminders that my name had somehow entered a conversation I was never supposed to be part of. I tried not to think about it. I focused on my work. I focused on my routine. But the truth was, my life had already changed. A few days after meeting Adrian, Vincent asked me to join another conversation. This time, it was not about what happened at the gala. It was about understanding the people around him. I arrived at his office in the afternoon, carrying the same hesitation I had felt every time I stepped into his world. The building still amazed me. The quiet floors, the organized movement of everyone inside, the feeling that every person knew exactly where they belonged. I walked into the meeting room and found Vincent looking through documents while Adrian sat nearby. "Thank you for coming," Vincent said. I placed my bag down and looked at him. "I am starting to think you say that every time, because you know I almost do not come." A small smile appeared on his face. "Maybe I appreciate that you still come." That answer caught me off guard. Vincent was not someone who needed people to choose him. People already followed him. They already listened. Yet he seemed to value the fact that I had a choice. We spent the next hour reviewing details from the gala again. Small moments. Small conversations. Things that seemed meaningless at first. Vincent asked questions. Adrian took notes. And I simply described what I remembered. Then something unusual happened. I noticed a detail I had forgotten. A guest who had been near the table that evening. Someone who had seemed completely ordinary. Someone who had spent the entire night trying not to be noticed. "Wait," I said. Both of them looked at me. There was someone else. Vincent leaned forward slightly. "Who?" I closed my eyes, trying to picture the room again. I did not know his name, but I remember him because he looked uncomfortable whenever people mentioned the wine. Adrian checked his notes. We did not have anyone matching that description. "Maybe because nobody was watching him," I replied. Vincent became quiet. That was something I had noticed about him. When he was thinking, he became completely still. Like every piece of information was being placed carefully into the right position. "Why do you remember him?" he asked. I thought about it. Because everyone else wanted to be seen. He wanted to disappear. Vincent looked at Adrian. It was only a brief glance, but I noticed it. Something about that detail mattered. Later, when Adrian left the room, I stayed behind with Vincent. The city outside was turning orange as the sun began to set. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "You trust very few people," I said. Vincent looked toward the window. "Trust is expensive." I understood what he meant. People often believe powerful individuals had easier lives. But the more I learned about Vincent, the more I realized power came with its own kind of loneliness. "Do you ever get tired?" I asked. He looked back at me. "Of what?" "Of always having to know who is honest and who is not." For a moment, his expression softened. "More than people realize." That answer stayed with me. Because behind the reputation, behind the carefully controlled image, there was a person who had spent years questioning everyone around him. And maybe that was why my honesty mattered to him. I was not part of his world. I was not trying to gain anything. I was simply someone who saw a problem and acted. Before I left, Vincent stopped me near the elevator. "Laurel." I turned around. "Be careful." The seriousness in his voice surprised me. "What?" He paused before answering. "Because once people notice someone important to me, they start paying attention." I wanted to ask what that meant. I wanted to understand why a simple waitress had suddenly become important enough to worry about. But before I could speak, the elevator doors opened. As I stepped inside, I looked back at Vincent standing alone in the hallway. For the first time, I realized something. I had entered his world because of a glass of wine. But I was staying because I had started to see the person behind the power. I used to think that trust was something people gave only after years of knowing someone. It was built slowly, through shared experiences, through promises kept, through moments when someone proved they would stay. But with Vincent Callahan, everything happened differently. Our worlds were too different. Our lives had followed completely separate paths. He had built an empire surrounded by people who depended on him. I had built a life around hard work, patience, and simply trying to make tomorrow a little better than today. Yet somehow, in the middle of all those differences, we had found a strange understanding, a quiet connection neither of us expected. After my conversation with Vincent about the person at the gala, I tried to return to my regular routine, but I noticed something had changed. Before, I walked through the city without thinking about who was watching. Now, I noticed the small details around me, the unfamiliar faces, the sudden silence when certain people entered a room, the way information traveled through Vincent's world faster than I could understand. It was a world built on awareness, and I was beginning to understand why he valued it. A few days later, Vincent asked me to meet him at a quiet restaurant away from the center of Manhattan. It was not a place filled with luxury or people trying to impress each other. It was simple, comfortable, almost ordinary. When I arrived, Vincent was already there. "You chose this place," I said as I sat down. He nodded. "I thought you would prefer it." I looked around and smiled slightly. "You are learning." For a second, I saw something rare from him, a genuine reaction, small but real. "Maybe I am," he said. We talked about things that had nothing to do with the gala. I told him about my first job after college, about working long hours, about learning that kindness was sometimes more valuable than recognition. He listened carefully, not the way powerful people listen when they are waiting for their turn to speak. He actually listened. Then he asked something unexpected. "Why did you become a waitress?" I looked down at my coffee. "Because it was available." He waited. I knew there was more to the answer. "And because I needed something stable. Something that allowed me to help my family while figuring out what I wanted next." Vincent nodded. "You always put responsibility first. Is that a bad thing?" I asked. "No," he replied. "It is something I rarely see." I studied his expression. "What about you?" He looked surprised. "What about me? Do you ever choose something because you want it? Not because it benefits your business. Not because people expect it. Just because you want it." The question seemed to catch him off guard. For a moment, he did not have an answer. That silence told me more than words could have. Vincent Callahan was someone who always had a plan, a solution, a reason. But maybe he had forgotten what it felt like to do something simply because it mattered. "I do not remember the last time someone asked me that," he finally said. I smiled softly. Then maybe someone needed to ask. He looked at me, and there was something different in his eyes. Not power, not curiosity, appreciation. Later that evening, when we left the restaurant, Vincent walked beside me instead of ahead of me. It was a small thing. Most people would not have noticed. But I did, because I had started noticing the little things about him. The moments when the powerful man disappeared and the real person appeared. Before I reached my car, Vincent stopped. "Laurel." I turned around. "You should know something." His tone became more serious. "The people around me are not used to someone like you." "Someone like me?" "Someone who says what they think without trying to gain something." I looked at him. Maybe people should do that more often. A quiet smile appeared on his face. Maybe. As I drove home that night, I thought about how strange life could be. A single decision had brought me into a world I never planned to enter. A world of influence, secrets, and people who lived by completely different rules. But the strangest part was not that Vincent Callahan had noticed me. The strangest part was that I was beginning to understand him. And somewhere between two completely different lives, a man who had spent years controlling everything had started learning what it felt like to simply be seen. I thought I understood Vincent Callahan by then. I thought I had learned how to see beyond the reputation, beyond the carefully controlled image everyone else knew. I had seen the quiet moments, the thoughtful questions, the way he listened when most people expected him to speak. But I had forgotten one important thing. A person like Vincent did not build his world by accident. There were reasons he trusted so few people. There were reasons he noticed every detail. And there were reasons he always seemed prepared for something others could not see. I learned that a few days later when I received a call from Adrian. His voice sounded different, more serious than usual. "Laurel, can you come to the office?" I immediately knew something had changed. When I arrived, the atmosphere felt completely different from before. People moved quickly but quietly. Conversation stopped when someone walked by. The usual calm confidence around Vincent's office had been replaced by tension. I found Vincent standing near the window, looking over the city. He did not turn around immediately when I entered. "Thank you for coming," he said. I looked at Adrian, then back at Vincent. "What happened?" Vincent placed a folder on the table. Inside were notes from the gala and information they had collected afterward. I looked through the pages carefully. "You found something?" Vincent nodded. "A pattern." I remembered the night at the restaurant. The way he always looked for connections between small details. Now I understood why. "The person you noticed was not random," he said. "Your observation helped us recognize that someone was trying to create confusion." I looked at the documents again. "So what does that mean?" Vincent was quiet for a moment. "It means someone close to my organization may not be as trustworthy as I believed." Those words carried weight. Not because he sounded angry, because he sounded disappointed. I had learned something about Vincent. He could handle pressure. He could handle challenges. But disappointment from someone he trusted seemed different. It reached deeper. "You seem surprised," I said. He looked at me. "Everyone assumes I expect betrayal. Do you not?" He looked back at the city. "I expect people to have their own interests. But I still hope some people choose loyalty." That answer surprised me, because it reminded me that Vincent was not emotionless. He was someone who had learned to protect himself because he had reasons to. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Of course. Why are you telling me all of this?" Vincent looked at me for a long moment. "Because you are already part of the story." I shook my head. "I am not. I am just someone who served a drink at a party." "No," he said. "You are someone who saw what everyone else ignored." His words reminded me of something I had heard before. But this time, they felt different. Because I realized Vincent was not only talking about the gala. He was talking about himself. For years, people had seen his power, his position, his influence. But very few people had looked closely enough to notice the person underneath. "You know," I said softly, "you are not as difficult to understand as people think." A small expression crossed his face. "Is that supposed to be comforting?" "Maybe." I smiled slightly. "Maybe it is supposed to remind you that you are still human." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Vincent looked away, almost as if he needed time to process those words. Later that evening, as I prepared to leave, Adrian stopped me near the elevator. "You should know something," he said. I turned around. "What?" "Nobody talks to Vincent the way you do." I looked at him, unsure how to respond. "Maybe someone should." Adrian smiled faintly. "That is probably why he listens." When the elevator doors closed, I found myself thinking about that sentence. Vincent Callahan had spent years surrounded by people who feared disappointing him. But I was never afraid of that. Maybe because I had never seen him as untouchable. I saw him as a person. And perhaps that was the one thing he had been missing all along. The ability to be seen without the weight of his name standing between him and the world. I used to think the hardest part of entering Vincent Callahan's world was understanding the rules. The quiet conversations. The hidden meanings. The way every person seemed to know more than they said. But I eventually realized something important. The hardest part was not learning his world. It was accepting that I had already become part of it. After everything that happened, I expected Vincent to create more distance. I thought once the situation at the gala was understood, he would return to his life, and I would return to mine. But instead, our conversations became more frequent. Not because I needed anything from him. Not because he offered me a different life. Simply because somewhere between two completely different worlds, we had started building trust. One evening, Vincent invited me to a small community event organized by one of his foundations. I was surprised when he asked, "Why me?" I said. He looked at me with the same calm expression I had grown familiar with. "Because you should see what your actions changed." I almost disagreed. I did not think I had changed anything. I had only reacted to a moment. But when I arrived, I saw something I never expected. The event was focused on helping local families and supporting educational programs. People were receiving opportunities they might not have had otherwise. It was not the world I imagined when I first heard Vincent Callahan's name. I expected everything around him to feel distant and untouchable. Instead, I saw people who knew him differently. People who spoke about him with appreciation instead of fear. I looked at Vincent standing nearby, watching everything quietly. "You do this often?" I asked. "More than people realize." "Why keep it private?" He looked at me. Because helping people should not always be about being seen. That answer stayed with me. It reminded me of something I had noticed about him from the beginning. Vincent did not seem interested in attention. He seemed interested in results. Later, while we walked outside, the city lights reflected across the streets. It was one of those rare moments where everything felt quiet, even in Manhattan. "You are different here," I said. Vincent looked at me. "Different?" "Yes. In your office, everyone is careful around you. Here, you look like someone else." He smiled slightly. "Maybe because here I do not have to pretend." I stopped walking for a moment. Those words revealed more than he probably intended. Vincent Callahan, the man everyone believed had complete control, was tired of always being seen as someone impossible to reach. "Do you ever regret the life you built?" I asked. It was a bold question. I knew that. But Vincent never seemed offended by honesty. He thought about it carefully. "I regret some choices. But I do not regret wanting to protect what mattered to me." I nodded slowly. There it was again. The part of him most people never saw. The person behind the reputation. The man who had built walls because something important had once needed protection. Before we left, Vincent handed me a small envelope. I looked at it carefully. "What is this?" "Something you earned." I immediately shook my head. "I do not want money." He looked surprised, but not offended. "I know." That answer made me pause. "Then what is it?" "A letter of recommendation. For the future you told me you wanted." I opened the envelope and saw information about a professional program related to my previous work in quality testing. Something I had given up years ago. I looked at him. "How did you know?" "You mentioned it once." I could not believe he remembered something so small. Most people forgot things I said within minutes. Vincent remembered. "You pay attention too," I said. He looked at me quietly. "Maybe I learned from you." That was the moment I understood something. I had entered Vincent Callahan's life because I noticed a problem nobody else saw. But somewhere along the way, he had started noticing things about me too. My dreams. My efforts. The parts of myself I had stopped believing mattered. And maybe that was the greatest change of all. Not that I had stepped into his world, but that, for the first time in years, Vincent Callahan had allowed someone to step into his. I used to believe that some people entered our lives for a reason, while others simply passed through without leaving a mark. But when I looked back at everything that happened with Vincent Callahan, I realized something I never expected. Sometimes, the person who changes your life is not the person you were searching for. Sometimes, they appear in the middle of an ordinary day, during a moment that should have meant nothing, and suddenly everything begins to move in a different direction. Months had passed since the night at the gala. The night when I was just a waitress trying to finish my shift. The night when I made a choice without knowing how much that choice would matter. My life was still not perfect. I still worked hard. I still had responsibilities. I still had days when I wondered if I was moving forward fast enough. But something had changed. I had started believing in possibilities again. The program Vincent helped me discover gave me a chance to return to something I once loved. Something I thought I had left behind forever. And Vincent changed too. Not in the way people around him expected. He did not become a different person overnight. He was still careful, still thoughtful, still someone who carried responsibilities most people never saw. But he had started allowing people closer. He had started listening more. And most importantly, he had started remembering that strength was not only about control. It was also about trust. One evening, I met Vincent at the same quiet restaurant where we had spoken before. The place had become familiar to both of us. Away from expectations. Away from people watching every move. He sat across from me, looking at the city lights outside the window. "You seem different," he said. I smiled slightly. "So do you." He looked amused. "Different how?" I thought about the answer. "You look less like someone carrying the entire world." He was quiet for a moment. Maybe because I finally realized I did not have to carry everything alone. That sentence stayed with me, because I knew how difficult it was for him to say something like that. Vincent Callahan had spent years being the person everyone depended on. The person with answers. The person who never appeared uncertain. But everyone has a moment when they realize they are human. Even the people who seem impossible to reach. "Do you ever think about that night?" I asked. He knew exactly what I meant. The gala. The moment our paths crossed. More often than you would expect. "Why?" Vincent looked at me. Because before that night, I thought I knew exactly what kind of people existed in my world. I listened quietly. People who wanted something. People who were afraid. People who followed the easiest path. He paused. Then you walked into the middle of a room full of powerful people and did the one thing nobody expected. I smiled. I poured wine on a carpet. He laughed softly. It was a small sound, but I had learned how rare it was. No, he said. You reminded everyone that doing the right thing does not depend on how much power someone has. I looked down at my hands. For so long, I had believed my ordinary life made me less important. But maybe ordinary people were the ones who saw the world most clearly. Maybe being unnoticed was not a weakness. Maybe it was a different kind of strength. Before we left, Vincent stopped outside the restaurant. The city moved around us. Cars passed. People walked by. Everyone continued living their own stories. Laurel, he said. I turned toward him. Thank you. I smiled. For what? He looked at me for a moment before answering. For reminding me who I wanted to be. Those words meant more than any grand gesture ever could. Because I knew Vincent did not say things without meaning them. He was a man who chose every word carefully. And that night, I understood the truth. I had never changed Vincent by trying to fix him. I had changed him by showing him something he had forgotten. That power meant nothing if you lost your humanity. Years later, people would still talk about Vincent Callahan. They would talk about his success, his influence, his ability to control an entire world. But I would remember something different. I would remember the man who looked at a waitress and saw a person. The man who learned that even the strongest people need someone who reminds them to listen. And I would always remember that sometimes the smallest actions create the biggest changes. Because one night, a woman who had never been noticed stepped forward. And the man who owned the room finally learned the value of seeing someone standing right in front of him.